I was still gripping the edge of the conference table when Rick Hanley leaned back in his chair, arms folded like he was delivering a verdict instead of feedback. His words landed cold, clipped final. Daniel, you're reliable, but not leadership material. I didn't blink. I've heard worse just never said out loud in a room I kept from catching fire. I'm Daniel Cross, 40, compliance director. My job is simple on paper: keep the audit trail clean, keep our SLA clocks honest, and make sure leadership never feels the heat I quietly redirect. I smiled the practice smile that says, got it, without giving him the satisfaction of watching me bleed, swiped my access badge off the table, and walked out. The hallway hummed with HVAC and old carpet. Outside, rain hammered the glass. I sat in my car and let the wipers carve 2 clean lanes through the blur. Silence filled the cabin, the kind that shows you what you've been tolerating. Before I go further, have you ever been told you're not leadership material while you're the one keeping the place from collapsing? If that hits, drop a quick like or tell me where you're listening from. I want to know who else has carried the weight with no title. Back home, the dining table was a mess of poster board wires and a small motor. My kid Evan barely looked up before asking why I was early, which told me everything I didn't want to admit. It was science project week. He explained his demo, how a system fails when one part stops working. I felt that land in my ribs. For 5 years, I've been that one part, the quiet fix, that kept everyone else looking competent. That night, I stood over the sink and made 2 decisions. First, no more canceled dinners, no more disappearing from my own life to cover for executives who confuse charisma with competence. Second, the Policy 7.4, audit prep logs. The daily operational notes I've written like scripture were done. Those logs are the invisible map that make other people's problems look like fate instead of neglect. Without them, gaps show. And I wanted to see what happens when the policies start speaking for me. At 9:00 a.m. the next morning, not 8:15, not 7:50. I badged in. Green light, same cheerful chirp, different deal. No early triage. No inbox scrub before coffee. I opened mail a dozen threads, flagged urgent most of them, CCs from people who never addressed me until the flames licked their shoes. I hit mark as read. For the first time in years, I stuck to the job I'm paid to do. By 9:42, Colin Mercer from Client Services hustled over red-faced, waving a printout. Northbridge deliveries off by 2 days. Rick said you could expedite. Not my lane, I said, eyes on my screen. Talk to procurement. He blinked. But you usually... I don't usually anymore, Colin. Handle your side. He stood there a beat, then left, like someone kicked a stool out from under him. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like air finally moving through lungs that had been clamped shut. At 5 on the dot, I shut the laptop, pocketed my badge, and walked out. The building sounded louder when it wasn't my job to muffle it. Phones ringing, printers, complaining managers, muttering like the noise itself would fix things. None of it was mine to carry. Evan and I made chili. We argued amicably about beans. He talked about a kid who hoards glue sticks and a girl who smoked him in math. I actually heard him no deadlines whispering in my ear, no mental spreadsheet running in the background. Later, I slept straight through. No midnight calls, no muscle memory reaching for the laptop. Just quiet. By morning, the quiet had a different shape. Not absence leverage. Silence isn't weakness, it's leverage. The kind you earn when you've kept score long enough to know where the cracks live. I poured coffee and opened a blank page out of habit, the one where I'd normally write, the Policy 7.4 daily notes supplier, aging SLA timers, the 3 escalations I'd normally preempt before anyone noticed. I watched the cursor blink, then closed it. If the company wanted to decide I wasn't leadership material, fine. I would give them exactly what the policies required and nothing more. No back-channel firefighting, no invisible labor subsidy. Let the documentation say what I no longer would. Walking in at 9, again the badge felt heavier on my belt, not because of weight, but because of what it now represented: access without obligation. I passed Rick in the hallway. He nodded the way people do when they think they've settled something. I nodded back the way you do when you've already made a different decision. Systems don't fail dramatically. They fray. They lose tension. The timers you never see start to expire. The first missed SLA doesn't make a sound. It just starts a clock you can't charm. I knew which clocks were ticking because I set them. And that's when things got interesting. By 9:42 tomorrow, the first urgent knock will hit my desk, and it won't be the last. That's the thing about silence. Once it starts talking, everyone hears it. I walked into Northbridge on Monday with the badge clipped to my belt like always, but this time I didn't swipe in early to clean up the mess before anyone noticed. 8:59 on the dot. A line of coffee cups at the security desk, a few managers already pacing with that. The client's upset look. I kept my eyes straight ahead. At my desk, I opened the daily system alerts. I'd seen that red banner before. A vendor delay had kicked the shipment window 2 days behind. Normally, I'd have already rerouted through a backup supplier, filed the exception under Policy 7.4, and emailed client services with a timeline fix before the caffeine hit my bloodstream. Not today. Today I let it sit in black and white on the dashboard for everyone to see. Policy 7.4 is our audit prep rule document. The gap named the owner proved the fix. I'd always been the fix. By 9:42, Colin Mercer was at my chair, flushed and holding a half-crumpled printout. Daniel Northbridge is already pinging about this. We can't afford another slip. I didn't look up. That's in client services, Colin. Isn't that your department? He hesitated. Well, yeah, but you always... Not anymore. I clicked through a compliance checklist calm, as if I hadn't just pulled the rug out from under him. Policy says client services manages delivery comms. You've got the playbook. The silence stretched. He wasn't used to me handing the ball back. Finally, he muttered something about looping in Cara Winslow and hurried off. Watching him fumble through his own responsibility felt less like cruelty and more like balance being restored. For years, my help had been their crutch. Late morning became a parade of half-panicked voices, tracking glitches, vendor tags misaligned, a missing approval form that used to be my job to shepherd through HR. Tanya Lowell from HR appeared in my inbox, need clarification on audit trail exceptions. Normally, I'd draft the response myself, attach 3 exhibits and copy legal. This time, I typed 1 line per policy 7.4. Please consult the originating department lead. Send. It wasn't reckless. It was precise. I wasn't breaking rules. I was enforcing them. Around lunch, Rick Hanley finally stopped by my cubicle. His tie was loosened, his forehead damp. He tapped the badge clipped to my belt like he suddenly remembered who built half the systems humming behind the walls. Daniel. What's going on? Northbridge is calling me directly. They say nobody can give them straight answers. I swiveled, slowly met his eyes. I'm doing exactly what you asked of me. Staying reliable. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say the words out loud, fix this. Then he swallowed them, because admitting it would mean admitting I'd been leadership all along. He walked away muttering about a status check with Elaine. That's when I knew the silence was working. Not loud, not showy, surgical. A single gap in the net had multiplied into chaos because the operator wasn't patching holes anymore. And the operator had a long memory. At 5, I went home. Evan was on the living room floor with his model kit wires and gears spread like a miniature factory collapse. Dad, the motor doesn't line up. It keeps stalling. I crouched beside him, studied the bent frame. What happens if you stop forcing it and let the weak piece fail? He frowned. Then the whole thing collapses. Exactly. I sat back the day's subject lines still flaring in my head. Sometimes you learn more by watching a system break than by keeping it upright. He shrugged and turned back to the model. But I could see the question forming behind his eyes, the same one I'd carried all day. How long could the silence hold before someone in power realized it wasn't a glitch, it was a strategy? By Tuesday 10:30 a.m., Tanya put a quick chat on my calendar. At 11:05, Elaine's assistant added me to boardroom C. The first cracks had become fractures, and now the right people were noticing. I walked into boardroom C 5 minutes early, not because I cared to impress, but because I wanted to see who'd sweat first. The room was a box of glass and brushed steel, the kind where silence hums louder than any HVAC unit. Elaine Brower was already at the table, pen in hand, flipping through a slim folder like she was skimming a resume. She didn't look up when I entered, but I noticed the pause the kind executives make when they realize the name they're about to depend on isn't the one they promoted. A moment later, Rick Hanley swept in jaw-tight coffee clutched like a lifeline. He nodded at Elaine, then aimed his gaze at me. Daniel Northbridge Systems is threatening to pull their renewal. They say nobody can provide a coherent status. His voice carried that executive calm, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. I leaned back in my chair. That's because the people responsible haven't been keeping the systems current. Everything they need is in the ops drive, labeled tag compliant. Elaine finally looked up. Eyes sharp pragmatic, the kind that care less about excuses than outcomes. So, why are we in this position? I let the silence stretch, not empty purposeful. Who'd break first? Rick did. Daniel, let's cut through it. You've always been reliable. He let the word hang like it was both a compliment and a chain. Now we're exposed. I need you to stabilize things before Northbridge walks. That word again, reliable. Not leadership material, not strategic, reliable. I almost laughed. I'm doing my job description, Rick. Nothing less, nothing more. You called that reliability. But let's be clear, reliability doesn't rebuild broken client trust. That requires leadership. Elaine set her pen down, folding her hands. What would you suggest, Daniel? Her question wasn't friendly, but it wasn't dismissive either. It was clinical. I kept my tone even. Policy 7.4 requires documented responsibility trails, who owns, who delayed, who fixed. If Northbridge can't get answers, it's because the designated owners aren't following procedure. That's not a compliance failure. That's leadership choosing optics over substance. Rick bristled fingers whitening on the coffee lid. Are you implying I've ignored procedure? I'm stating facts. The audit logs show who signed off, who rerouted, who stalled. If you'd like, I can circulate them. It landed like a hammer in velvet. Elaine's gaze sharpened. Rick's face flushed. He opened his mouth, then shut it. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Compliance leaves a trail sharper than any knife. Elaine broke the tension. Daniel put together a brief, clear visibility into where the breakdown occurred, today. I nodded once, calm, surgical. It'll be on your desk by 3. When we adjourned, Rick tried to catch me in the hall. His voice dropped. You think you're clever, don't you? Sitting on the sidelines while I take the heat. I stopped, faced him. Not clever, Rick, just compliant. You wanted me reliable. I am. If that leaves you exposed, maybe reliability isn't what you need. His eyes narrowed, something between anger and fear. Watch yourself, Daniel. I've been watching for years. Back at my desk, my inbox lit up. Tanya Lowell had scheduled a compliance check-in. Colin Mercer had forwarded a Northbridge escalation email subject line, screaming urgent, client demands, update. No comment, no context, just his attempt to shove it over the fence. I replied with 6 words. Per policy 7.4, you own this. Send. At 5, I left. No staying late, no patching holes. Evan was at the dining table with his half-built model wires dangling like exposed veins. It's still not working, he muttered. I set my bag down, studied the crooked gear. Sometimes the system has to fail so you know which part needs replacing. He frowned. But what if the whole thing falls apart? Then you build something better. He nodded slowly, still skeptical. He'll understand one day. Back at work the next morning, the cracks had widened. Northbridge's account manager bypassed Colin and Rick, entirely CCing Elaine and me directly. The subject line was a single word. Escalation. By 1:30 p.m., Elaine's assistant dropped a follow-up on my calendar, boardroom C. For the first time, they weren't ignoring me, they were depending on me. The only question left was how I'd use that leverage. By 3 o'clock, I was back in boardroom C, the same brushed steel table, the same hum of air conditioning. Only this time, Kara Winslow was already seated at the far end, a leather-bound planner, open tabs sticking out like flags. She smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Daniel, she said brightly, thanks for putting your notes together. Elaine asked me to co-lead this debrief so we can move quickly. Co-lead, translation take credit for whatever I put on the table. I set my folder down, sliding a single sheet across to Elaine Brower. Concise. Timestamps, signatures, missed deadlines, all pulled straight from Policy 7.4 compliance logs. She scanned it, pen tapping twice before she looked up. Daniel, this is clear. Why hasn't this surfaced earlier? Before I could answer, Kara leaned in. Because Daniel's been in the weeds. He does excellent documentation, but sometimes the strategic layer gets lost. Smooth rehearsed like she'd practiced it in the mirror. Rick Hanley cleared his throat, nodding, as if Kara had just explained gravity. Exactly. Daniel keeps us compliant, but strategy is where leadership steps in. I kept my face neutral. They wanted to box me in as a paper pusher. Fine. That's when I opened the second folder and slid it toward Elaine. Inside a chart mapping every escalation, every policy breach, every handoff Kara's team had dropped in the last 6 months. I anticipated that, framing, I said, evenly, which is why I included comparative data. And to be plain, Policy 7.4 is our audit prep standard document, the gap name the owner approved the fix. Strategic oversight without enforcement isn't strategy, it's spin. For the first time, Kara's smile faltered. Elaine's pen stilled. Are you saying the breakdown is in client strategy? Elaine asked. I'm saying the breakdown is in accountability. The logs don't lie. Rick shifted in his chair, voice tighter now. Daniel, this is bordering on insubordination. I met his eyes. Calm, surgical, no Rick. It's called transparency. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It was heavy charge, the kind that makes people shift in their seats. Elaine didn't move. She just studied me, expression unreadable. When the meeting ended, Kara caught me in the hallway. Her voice dropped. You think you're clever, don't you? Undercutting me in front of Elaine. I turned slowly, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. No, Kara, I think I'm accurate. If that undercuts you, maybe accuracy isn't your friend. Her eyes narrowed. Careful, Daniel. Strategy has long memories. I gave her a thin smile. So does compliance. That night I went home early again. Evan was on the living room floor, his model half collapsed, the motor still refusing to turn. He looked up frustrated. I fixed one gear, but now the others won't align. I crouched beside him, adjusted the crooked frame. That's how systems fail. One correction exposes the next weakness. If you really want it to run, you don't just fix, you rebuild. He frowned. That sounds harder. It is, I said, but it's the only way it lasts. He nodded slowly, the same stubborn crease between his eyebrows I see in the mirror. The next morning, my inbox carried the fallout. Colin Mercer had forwarded a message chain, Northbridge's account manager, furious at silence from strategy demanding a leadership call. Only this time, the CC line didn't just include Elaine. It included me by name. By noon, Elaine's assistant sent a new invite. Executive briefing, tomorrow. The betrayal had failed. Kara tried to box me in. Rick tried to frame me, but the policies spoke louder than both of them, and Elaine heard. By 8:55 a.m. the next morning, I'd be outside boardroom C again, watching who arrived first and who couldn't meet my eyes. That room was about to decide whether they could afford not to hear me. The next morning, I arrived outside boardroom C at 8:55, badge clipped to my belt, coffee in hand. The glass walls let me see who was inside before I walked in. Elaine Brower was at the head of the table, notes in front of her. Rick Hanley leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. Kara Winslow scrolled on her phone, her binder stacked high with color tabs. I stepped in at 9. Sharp placed a single folder on the table and sat down without waiting for an invitation. Elaine glanced up. Daniel, you have the floor. I opened the folder. Inside was a 3-page summary pulled directly from Policy 7.4 audit logs, mapping 6 months of missed deadlines, unsigned approvals, and vendor exceptions. Each line traced back to either Rick's oversight or Kara's team's spin. This isn't speculation, I said evenly. These are system entries. Every timestamp, every owner, every escalation. Documented, verifiable. If Northbridge is threatening to walk, it isn't because compliance failed. It's because leadership ignored the trail until the client started following it themselves. Elaine's eyes narrowed as she scanned the pages. This is thorough. Kara leaned forward, her tone sugary. With respect, Daniel, raw logs don't tell the whole story. Strategy requires interpretation. Nuance. Nuance doesn't fix broken shipments, I cut in. Nuance doesn't answer when a client calls. Policy 7.4 is simple document, the gap name the owner prove the fix. No spin, no slides, just custody of work. Rick slammed his palm on the table. Careful, Daniel. 2 years earlier, I'd stapled a 30-page recovery plan while Rick presented my numbers to the room without saying my name. I told myself it didn't matter who spoke as long as the work held. I met his eyes now. Calm, surgical. No Rick. Careful is what I've been for 5 years. This is precise. The silence that followed was heavy-stretched. Finally, Elaine set the folder down. Daniel, if what you're showing is accurate, this company is exposed. I'll need a full briefing by close of business. No summaries. Full trail. Already compiled, I said, sliding a flash drive across the table. Encrypted. 2-factor locked. Her brows lifted surprise, maybe respect. Kara's lips pressed into a thin line. Rick's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. The meeting ended without further debate. Elaine gathered her notes and left first. Rick followed, muttering into his phone. Kara lingered, staring at me with the kind of smile that's really a warning. You just painted a target on your back, she said softly. I stood, pocketed my badge. Targets don't matter when you own the evidence. That night at home, Evan was back at the dining table, his model finally spinning gears, humming in a rough rhythm. He grinned when I walked in. I got it working. I studied the wobble in the motor, the uneven gear teeth. Good start. But if you want it to last, you'll need to rebuild the frame. He frowned defensive, but it works now. For how long, I asked gently. His silence told me he already knew the answer. Back at the office the next day, the fallout had begun. Colin Mercer stopped by my desk, shifting on his feet. Elaine's asking about you. She said you're leading tomorrow's client call. Northbridge specifically requested your name. For a moment, I let that sit. The same people who told me I wasn't leadership material were now putting me in front of the client they couldn't manage. Before I go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been overlooked until the day the system breaks and suddenly everyone needs you to clean up what they ignored? If that resonates, hit like or drop a quick comment. I'd like to know how many of us have carried that silence until it spoke for itself. Because by Friday, my silence wasn't just leverage, it was currency, and Elaine was about to decide how much it was worth. By 9:58 a.m., Friday, Northbridge was on the bridge line, and Elaine typed 3 words in the meeting chat: Daniel leads. Now. By 9:58 Friday morning, the Northbridge bridge line was open, and my laptop screen filled with names. The client's director of operations, their compliance lead, even their outside counsel faces. I knew voices I'd dealt with in a dozen late-night calls. Only this time, I wasn't the one scrambling in the background. I was at the center square. Elaine Brower opened the call with a clipped introduction. Northbridge, thank you for joining. I'd like to hand this to Daniel Cross, who's been running our compliance engine. He'll walk you through what we've compiled. She didn't say Rick's name. She didn't say Kara's. Just mine. I leaned forward, my voice steady. Good morning. I'll be direct. For the past 6 months, Northbridge has experienced repeated slippages. Each one has a paper trail. What I'm about to show you isn't interpretation, it's the record. I shared my screen a single chart from the audit logs. 6 months of missed approvals, each tagged with a timestamp, initials, and outcome. Policy 7.4 in practice, document the gap, name the owner, prove the fix. Except, the fixes never came. Northbridge's director squinted at the chart. So you're saying these failures weren't system errors. They were leadership failures. I didn't hesitate. Yes. And here's why: every exception was logged, every alert sent, every reminder issued. The operators documented the gaps. The designated owners didn't act. That isn't compliance failure. That's strategic neglect. For a moment, the line went quiet, except for the hum of someone's HVAC bleeding through. Then, Northbridge's compliance lead spoke. This matches what we've seen on our side. We stopped getting timely updates. When we asked, we got spin instead of substance. Kara jumped in, her voice smooth. Let's not lose sight of the broader picture. The compliance lead cut her off. With respect, we don't want the broader picture. We want accountability. Elaine's gaze flicked to me across the conference table. She didn't need to say anything. The client had just validated my evidence. Rick shifted in his chair, his jaw working. Daniel, you're undermining. A year ago, I sat on a warehouse pallet at 1:13 a.m., rewriting a route map while Kara polished slides for the recap. Rick presented it like strategy had saved the day. I turned my mic back on, calm, surgical. No, Rick, I'm clarifying. For the first time in months, Northbridge is getting a straight answer. The client's outside counsel cleared his throat. One more thing. We'll need a remedial plan by Monday. Signed, dated, and binding. Otherwise, this renewal stalls. Remedial plan just means we sign our names to the fixes and live with the dates. I nodded. You'll have it. Full compliance trail. No spin. Elaine spoke then, her voice measured. Thank you, Daniel. That's the direction we'll take. Northbridge will follow up within 72 hours. The call ended. The silence in the room didn't. Kara gathered her binder, her face tight. That wasn't your place, Daniel. I stood closing my laptop. When the client CCs me by name, it becomes my place. Rick pushed back from the table. You think this makes you a hero? You just made us dependent on you. I looked at him, calm as ever. You were already dependent. The difference is now, everyone knows it. Reliable was the word they used when they needed silence to hold the line. That afternoon, Elaine called me into her office. Her tone was flat, but her eyes carried weight. You turned the client today. Without the logs, we'd be dead in the water. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. Policy speaks louder than spin. She tapped her pen on the desk. I'll need that remedial plan on my desk by Sunday night. You'll have full authority to structure it. Choose your team. For the first time, she didn't call me reliable. She called me necessary. At home, Evan was still tinkering with his model. The gears were turning now, but the frame creaked with every cycle. "It works," he said proudly. I watched the wobble the way the motor strained against the frame. "It works for now, but if you want it to last, you'll need to strip it down, build it stronger." He frowned. "That means starting over." I put a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes that's the only way. Back at the office on Monday morning, my inbox had already shifted tone. Messages from department heads asking for direction, not dumping problems. A ping from Colin Mercer-Need. Sign off for client messaging your call. Even Tanya Lowell from HR had flagged me on a policy exception, asking how I wanted to address it. The same people who ignored me were now waiting on me. My silence had done its work. The question was whether I'd use this leverage to fix the frame or let it collapse so I could build something entirely new. By 7:05 a.m., Monday Legal and HR would be in the same room waiting for my draft, and for the first time, I'd decide who stayed on the frame and who came off it. By 7:05 Monday morning, I was back in boardroom C. This time, the seats were full. Legal, HR, finance, even procurement. Brookfield Dynamics runs on handoffs. Today, they were finally visible on paper. Elaine Brower sat at the head, her expression unreadable. A copy of my draft remedial plan sat in front of every chair. Richard Hanley walked in late muttering into his phone, then dropped into the seat across from me. Kara Winslow followed her binder stacked high with graphs and color tabs. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Her entire presence was designed to signal control. Elaine cleared her throat. "Daniel, you've had 72 hours. Walk us through this." I opened my laptop projecting a single-page summary. Northbridge asked for signed, dated binding commitments. This plan covers every missed milestone with a named owner timeline and proof step. Policy 7.4 in action, document the gap name the owner proved the fix. Tanya Lowell from HR leaned forward, flipping pages. "Daniel, some of these timelines require reassignments. That means moving headcount. Have you cleared this with Rick?" I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. Elaine gave me authority. Rick's face flushed red. "You're cutting my team without approval." I met his glare, calm, surgical. "I'm reallocating based on documented failures. Approvals were logged, deadlines missed. This isn't punishment, it's correction." For a moment, the room was silent except for the scratch of pens. Then Kara leaned in, her voice smooth. "With respect, this reads like a compliance checklist. Strategy requires flexibility. Clients don't want to hear about logs and signatures, they want solutions." Elaine tapped her pen against the table. "Northbridge told us Friday they want accountability, not spin." Her eyes slid to Kara, then back to me. "Continue, Daniel." I scrolled to the second page. Each fix has 2 signatures, owner and verifier. No task closes until both are logged. That means HR and legal will see every step, no exceptions. The legal counsel adjusted his glasses. "That protects us if we're audited." "Exactly," I said. "We don't just fix, we prove." Rick slammed his folder shut. "This is bureaucratic overkill." I turned to him, my voice even. "No, Rick. Bureaucracy is paper for its own sake. This is evidence. Evidence keeps clients. Evidence keeps contracts." The flash drive wasn't in my pocket anymore, but the habit of carrying proof was. For the first time, Elaine leaned back, considering me, with something other than skepticism. "So, if this works, you're saying renewal is safe." "I'm saying if this works, renewal isn't a gamble, it's guaranteed." That afternoon, Northbridge confirmed it. Their director sent an email, acknowledged. "This structure meets our requirements, expecting first checkpoint by Friday." A checkpoint is just a dated gate with an owner, and a verifier miss it, and the contract clock resets against you. One sentence, but it hit harder than a victory lap. The client had accepted my plan. When I got home that night, Evan was at the dining table again. The motor on his model finally ran smooth, the gears aligned. He looked up, grinning. "See stronger frame." I nodded, told you starting over was the only way. But as I watched him, I felt the weight settle in. Fixing the frame meant carrying it. My name was now on every gear, every screw. If one failed, so would I. That's the part most people never see. Revenge isn't just about payback. It's about the cost of finally being visible. When the silence breaks, it echoes. Have you ever stepped up only to realize the moment you finally got authority was the same moment the entire weight shifted onto your shoulders? If you've lived that, drop a comment or share this. Because too many people know the silence and too few know what it costs to speak. The next morning, Kara stopped me outside the elevators. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts," she said quietly. "Clients forget. Boards move on. And when they do, you'll be the one holding the bag." 3 years earlier, I watched her charm a client in this same hallway while I redlined a schedule on a copier lid at 10:42 p.m. She kept the room. I kept the risk. I looked at her steady. Better to hold the bag than drop it. She smiled thin, her eyes sharp. "We'll see." By Thursday, the first checkpoint review was due. Elaine called me into her office. On her desk sat a printed email from Northbridge's outside counsel. "Brookfield Dynamics is in provisional compliance. Continue oversight." She slid it across the desk. "This is good. But understand if you slip once, they'll hold me accountable for trusting you." I nodded, "Then I won't slip." She studied me for a long moment. "Daniel, if this works, you'll have saved this company, but you'll also have made enemies." "I already have," I said quietly. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of enemies. I was afraid of becoming exactly what they'd called me from the start: reliable. The guy who held everything together, invisible until the gears collapsed. And if that was all they saw, then maybe letting the frame fail was the only way to prove what I could really build. By 9:00 a.m. Friday, Legal's calendar invite read, Checkpoint 1 sign-off attendees: Elaine, Tanya, Rick, Kara, me. One stroke of my pen could either lock me in as the backbone or show them how fragile their trust really was. By 8:59 Friday morning, I walked into boardroom A with the remedial plans still warm from the printer. Legal, HR, procurement, and finance were already seated. Elaine Brower sat at the head posture, sharp pen balanced between her fingers. Kara Winslow was across from me, binder open like a shield. Richard Hanley stood near the window, arms crossed, pretending to study the skyline. The agenda was blunt: Checkpoint 1 sign-off. Elaine started without ceremony. Northbridge has acknowledged progress, but their counsel flagged expansion. They want to double scope by next quarter if we prove stability today. The room shifted. Expansion wasn't a buzzword. It meant more sites, more SKUs, more cross-team handoffs. Without added quality gates, our defect rate would scale with volume. Proof wasn't optional. It was the only way to survive. Rick scoffed first. "That's impossible. We just got them calmed down now. They want more. They're testing us." Kara's smile was polished, but the edge in her tone gave her away. "It's an opportunity. If we shape the narrative, right strategy offsets the risk." Elaine turned to me. "Daniel," I opened my folder, sliding the plan across the table. "Expansion works only if the frame holds. That means evidence. Every milestone, signed every exception, logged every checkpoint passed. Without proof, strategy is theater." Kara tilted her head. "So we drown them in paperwork." I didn't look at her. "We protect the contract. Paper isn't noise when it proves delivery." The legal counsel spoke for the first time. Northbridge specifically requested proof trails. They've had enough spin. Rick slapped the table folders, scattering. "This is insane. Compliance doesn't run the company." Elaine's voice cut him clean. "No, Rick. Failure runs correction. That's the difference." For a second, the only sound was the buzz of the overhead lights. A flashback pulled at me 3 years earlier, 10:42 p.m. My badge pinging green as I hauled a box of replacement drives into the warehouse. Rick had been at a corporate dinner texting group shots from a private room. Reliable. That was my label. Reliable meant invisible. Reliable meant replaceable. I looked up now, voice steady. Policy 7.4 was written for this. Document name, fix, verify. No excuses. If Northbridge doubles scope, they'll only stay if we finally prove we've learned. Elaine tapped her pen, once then set it down. "Daniel's right. The board will see it that way too. If we pass this checkpoint, expansion is viable." 2 years ago, I'd watched a renewal die in this same room because no one could prove delivery. The silence had been louder than the excuses. I'd never forgotten it. Rick muttered, "You're giving him the keys." Elaine didn't blink. "I'm giving him responsibility." By noon, the checkpoint was complete. Northbridge signed off provisionally their counsel, sending a short note: evidence validated. Proceed to next phase. The weight landed heavier than I expected. Expansion wasn't praise, it was a dare. Fail once, and the frame collapsed with me under it. That evening, I sat at the dining table while Evan tested his rebuilt model. The gears spun smooth, no wobble. He grinned. It runs better than before. I smiled back, but the tightness in my chest stayed. Yeah, but now you have to maintain it. He frowned. Why, it's fixed. Because fixed today doesn't mean fixed tomorrow. As he turned back to his work, I thought about Northbridge's terms, about Elaine's expression, about Rick's anger, and Kara's smile. Fixed today, fragile tomorrow. Saturday morning, Elaine called me into her office. She held a printed email in one hand. Northbridge has formally requested expansion terms. They want you named as project owner. Kara's voice cut in from the doorway. That's a mistake. Clients don't run this company. Elaine ignored her eyes on me. Daniel, this is your call. Do we take expansion under your system, or do we hold? I sat across from her, the memory of every silent night pressing against me. Revenge wasn't about Rick or Kara. It was about deciding whether silence stayed broken or whether I let the frame collapse under their politics. I said it plainly. We take expansion, but it runs through proof. My team, my structure, my signatures. Otherwise, Northbridge walks and they take our credibility with them. Elaine studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. Then it's yours. Rick cursed under his breath. Kara's smile cracked just slightly. The calendar invite landed at 4:12 p.m., subject line in all caps, expansion decision. By 9:00 a.m., Monday the board agenda listed a single item, expansion oversight. My name sat under it in bold. If the frame cracked, Brookfield Dynamics might wobble, but I'd be the one to shatter. By 9:00, Monday morning, I was already in the boardroom. The agenda glowed on the wall screen in sharp blue letters, expansion oversight. My name sat under it in bold. The directors filtered in one by one, exchanging nods and paper-thin smiles. Elaine Brower entered last, closing the glass door behind her with a deliberate click. Kara Winslow had already claimed a seat near the front binder, open every page tabbed in color. Rick Hanley lingered by the coffee tray, stirring sugar he wouldn't drink jaw tight. Elaine began. Northbridge validated checkpoint 1. They've requested expansion doubling scope by next quarter, and they've named Daniel Cross as project owner. Today we decide if Brookfield Dynamics accepts. The air shifted. Expansion wasn't just another project, it was survival. One director asked, what safeguards are in place? We double scope, we double exposure. I slid a packet forward. Every milestone is paired with a proof step, owner verifier sign-off. If a task isn't logged, it isn't complete. Policy 7.4 locks that. No signature, no delivery. Plain English, if it isn't signed and time-stamped, it never happened. Rick cut in, voice sharp. That's bureaucracy. We'll drown before we deliver. I didn't look at him. We already drowned once 2 years ago when renewal collapsed because no one could prove execution. Silence doesn't sell. Evidence does. Some heads nodded. Others stayed neutral. Kara leaned forward, her smile polished, but her words edged. With respect, this reads like an audit checklist, not a growth strategy. Northbridge isn't asking for forms. They're asking for confidence. Confidence comes from vision. Elaine kept her eyes on me. Daniel. I tapped the packet once. Vision without proof is theater. Proof without vision is survival. Northbridge isn't testing charm. They're testing systems. And systems only hold if we document them. The legal counsel spoke up. Their contract explicitly requires auditability. Kara countered smooth as glass. Auditability isn't loyalty. Clients can still walk. Her words pulled me backward to nights at 2 a.m. Alone in the warehouse, badge pinging green as I carried replacement drives while Rick texted photos from banquets. Reliable. That was my label. Reliable meant invisible. I looked around the table, voice low. You call it bureaucracy. I call it survival. I didn't spend 5 years invisible so someone else could promise vision while I carried the proof. Silence hung long enough to sting. One director asked, and if this system fails, what if checkpoints are missed? I met his eyes. Then failure has a name and a date, and it won't be invisible. That's the point. Elaine folded her hands. Daniel's system is validated by Northbridge. The question is whether this board trusts it enough to tie expansion to it. Rick slammed his folder. This is a mistake. Give him this and he'll bury us in policies. Elaine's reply was surgical, or he'll keep us alive. The directors murmured, flipping through my packet. For the first time, the balance felt real. It wasn't about Rick's anger or Kara's polish anymore. It was about whether silence finally carried weight. And that's when the truth surfaced. I hadn't pushed for this to bring Rick down or to corner Kara. I hadn't even pushed for expansion. What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was to stop being invisible. to stop carrying proof in the shadows while others took the credit. Elaine raised her hand. We'll take a vote. The directors went one by one, approve, 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 with oversight. By the time it circled back, the outcome was clear. Expansion tied to Policy 7.4. Expansion tied to my name. Elaine gave the final word. Motion carried. The corporate secretary typed it into the minutes before we stood. Motion BDEO09 approved. Oversight assigned to D cross per Policy 7.4. The calendar invite hit my inbox before I reached the glass doors. Subject line, expansion oversight, cross. Rick muttered a curse. Kara closed her binder slowly, her smile intact, but thinner at the edges. I exhaled once steady, but inside the weight pressed heavier than any late-night patch job. Expansion wasn't victory, it was a test. Walking past the glass offices, I caught my reflection, tie askew eyes sharper than I remembered. Not invisible anymore, but visibility had a price. A door sensor chirped behind me, the same clipped tone I'd heard 1,000 nights. This time, it wasn't the sound of being overlooked. That night, Evan was back at the dining table, his motor spinning faster, humming louder. It's stronger now, he said, but it still shakes sometimes. I tightened a bolt, the hum steadying. Then we reinforce it, every time it wobbles. He nodded and bent back over his project. I thought about the board's vote, about Kara's smile, Rick's fury, Elaine's gaze. Expansion wasn't a gift. It was a dare with my name stamped on it. By Wednesday's stand-up, HR had a quick sync on my calendar. Legal sent over a redlined appendix with my initials at the bottom of every page. Friday's checkpoint had been easy compared to what was waiting. By Wednesday morning, my calendar looked like a minefield. HR had dropped in a quick sync, flagged urgent. Legal sent a redlined appendix with my initials stamped across every page. Every clause was traced back to Policy 7.4, like threads in a net. Expansion wasn't an assignment anymore. It was a leash with my name on it. I walked into HR's glass-walled office at 10:00 sharp. Tanya Lowell, our HR director, gestured toward the small table already stacked with printouts. She slid one across to me. Daniel, as project owner, you're assuming personal accountability for Northbridge compliance. Sign here to acknowledge. The form was heavy with legalese, but one line caught my eye. Failure to maintain documentation may constitute gross negligence. I met Tanya's eyes. So if someone skips a sign-off, I take the fall. She didn't flinch. That's what ownership means. For years, I'd carried proof invisibly. Now, it was formalized, inked into policy. I signed anyway. Better to have my name tied to the system than erased from it. The door sensor chirped as I left HR, same two-note ping I used to hear at 10:42 p.m. on patch nights. Back then, it meant no one was watching. Today, it sounded like a witness. Legal came next. Their counsel walked me through the appendix, every line thick with red track changes. Audit checkpoints will be quarterly. Any missed logs will trigger automatic review. Quarterly audit checkpoints just mean every 3 months we prove we did what we said: signatures, timestamps, names. No log, no credit. One copy printed with a faint coffee smear across page 2. Imperfect, sure, still admissible. Proof doesn't need to be pretty, it needs to be provable. By noon, whispers were moving through the halls. I passed Colin Mercer from Client Services, who raised an eyebrow. So it's true you're holding the Northbridge leash. Not a leash, I said, a frame. Big difference. He chuckled low. Depends who's watching. Rick made sure people were watching. He cornered me in the break room, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. You're enjoying the spotlight, huh? Let's see how long before your paperwork buries us. I stirred my coffee slowly. Paperwork didn't sink the last renewal. Silence did. His jaw tightened, but he didn't push further. Not in front of the analysts 2 steps away pretending not to listen. Kara's move was quieter, but sharper. That afternoon, she forwarded me a deck she'd prepped for the Friday town hall. The title slide read, Expansion Success, Vision Meets Execution. Every chart leaned toward her strategy. Every bullet minimized the compliance framework. At the bottom in fine print, one line read, Ops Validation led by D. Cross. I stared at the email for a long minute. Vision at the top, proof buried at the bottom. Same old playbook. I didn't reply. Instead, I added a slide of my own. To the shared deck screenshots of the signed checkpoints initials, visible timestamps clear. No commentary. Just evidence. Friday came fast. The town hall buzzed with staff-packed, shoulder-to-shoulder cameras streaming live for Northbridge. Elaine opened. Kara took the stage, all polished talking growth curves and strategic horizons. Then my slides appeared on the screen, signatures, dates, proof. Elaine glanced my way, then back at Kara. For a moment, Kara's smile faltered. I stepped up beside her. My voice stayed level. Growth doesn't happen because we say it will. It happens because every step is signed, verified, and delivered. That's why Northbridge doubled scope. Not because of vision, because of proof. Vision sells the trailer. Proof delivers the film. The room quieted. Even through the live stream delay, I knew Northbridge was watching. Kara didn't argue. She just smiled tighter, shifting to her next slide like nothing happened. But the silence that followed me off stage was louder than applause. That night at home, Evan was working on his model again. The gears spun faster now, but the motor vibrated against the table. "It still shakes," he said, frowning. I tightened one more screw. "That's why we reinforce. Proof isn't a guarantee, it's maintenance." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to testing. I thought about Tanya's form, Legal's appendix, Kara's deck, Rick's muttering in the break room. Proof wasn't the end of invisibility. It was the start of exposure. But at least now when things shook, the weight wasn't hidden in silence. By Sunday evening, Elaine forwarded me an email straight from Northbridge's COO. "Appreciate the transparency. Expansion phase approved. Expecting continued oversight by D. Cross." It was the first time a client had addressed me by name instead of your team or ops. I read it twice, then archived it. By Monday's stand-up, fallout was already shifting. HR scheduled oversight audits every other Friday. Legal created a separate compliance channel with my name pinned at the top. And Kara, she pinged me. "Let's align on talking points before the next exec brief." I didn't reply, not yet, because proof wasn't just leverage anymore. It was visibility. And visibility, once claimed, couldn't be unseen. By Thursday at 7:45 a.m., a new calendar block appeared, executive session oversight risks closed. Elaine was the organizer. Thursday morning, the calendar invite blinked at me like a warning, executive session oversight risks closed. No agenda, no attachments, just a period in the notes field. That was Elaine Brower's signal, surgical, no wasted words. I walked into the small boardroom at 8:00 sharp. Not the big glass one for public theater, this one was soundproof. Black oval table, 5 chairs. Elaine sat at the head, steady, composed. Kara Winslow was already there, binder open pen, aligned perfectly. Rick Hanley leaned back, arms crossed, chin tilted, like he wanted a fight. Elaine started. "Northbridge approved expansion. Good. Now we face the fallout. Legal flagged risk. HR flagged liability. Rick, you raised budget concerns. Kara, you flagged reputation. Daniel, you own compliance. Let's hear it." Rick lunged first. "This framework is a disaster. If Daniel stumbles, Northbridge pulls and we all sink. Liability sits in ops." He jabbed a finger at me. "I warned you, bury us in paperwork, you'll drown us." I kept my voice level. Paperwork didn't sink us last time. Silence did. Rick's jaw tightened. "Don't twist this. You're hiding behind signatures." I slid a folder across the table. Thin, color-coded signed checkpoints with timestamps. Elaine flipped a page, raised her brow. "Rick, these gaps are from your division." He flushed. "Preliminary drafts out of context. Policy 7.4 doesn't care about context," I said. "Only proof. No log, no credit." Kara stepped in smoothly. "We respect Daniel's rigor, but perception matters. Clients don't want handcuffs, they want partnership. If they feel micromanaged expansion sours." I looked at her. "Clients buy certainty. We rent it to them in signatures." Her smile thinned, but she didn't argue. Elaine folded her hands. "Rick, your checkpoints failed. Kara, your deck buried compliance. Neither is sustainable. Northbridge doubled scope because of Daniel's system. They're watching us closer than ever. If we fail now, there won't be a rescue." Rick leaned forward, voice low. "So what? We hand him the keys. Let him run. Ops like a kingdom." "Not a kingdom," I said. "A frame. You can build however you want inside it. Skip the frame, you skip the deal." Kara's pen tapped once against her binder. "And if the frame cracks, then I crack with it. That's ownership." Elaine studied me a long beat, then nodded. "Good. Because this board just voted. Effective immediately, Daniel Cross assumes direct oversight authority for expansion. Compliance audit delivery. Full accountability." Rick slammed the table. "This is insane." Elaine didn't blink. "What's insane is pretending proof is optional. Kara shut her binder softly. If that's the vote, I'll support it. But perception remains my concern. Perception follows results, I said, and results follow proof. Elaine stood, meeting adjourned. Rick stormed out muttering curses. Kara lingered just long enough to whisper, "Frames bend under pressure. Remember that." Then she walked out, heels clicking like punctuation. Elaine stayed behind. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I've seen people mistake attention for authority. Don't." "I'm not after attention," I said. "I'm after visibility. Authority isn't applause, it's a ledger with your name at the top." For a moment she almost smiled, then she left too. That night at home, Evan was hunched over his motor frame again. Sparks jumped once as he soldered. He frowned. "It works, but only if I don't rush." I tightened one screw. That's the point. Frames hold under pressure if you reinforce them steady every time. He grinned as the motor hummed clean. I thought about the folder I'd slid across the board table, the signatures, the missing checkpoints, Rick's red face, Kara's polished spin, Elaine's surgical tone. For years the weight had been invisible. Now, it wasn't just seen, it was mine to carry. By Monday's board update, the minutes would read, Cross-assumed oversight authority per policy 7.4. Expansion tied to compliance framework. Dry words, but permanent. What stuck with me wasn't in the minutes. It was Kara's whisper, frames bend under pressure. Maybe they do, but some frames bend only to prove what they're made of. I sat in the boardroom long after the vote was called. The folder in front of me carried 3 signatures across the bottom line: Elaine Brower, Tanya Lowell, and mine. Richard Rick Hanley's name was nowhere. HR had dressed it up as a retirement package, a face-saving exit, but we all knew what it was: a quiet removal, the kind he used to orchestrate for other people. Now it was his turn. Kara Winslow lingered near the window, a binder in her arms, lips pressed tight. She didn't argue, didn't grandstand. Elaine had shifted her to strategy presentations weeks ago. She was still useful, but she wasn't steering anymore, for someone who once pulled every string that silence was louder than any speech. As I closed the folder, I noticed the faint green tab on one of Kara's old binders, the same style she used to bury facts under layers of spin. Months ago, I would have shouldered the work inside it, cleaned up the half-truths built systems behind the curtain. Now, I slid it aside. My system stood without it. Walking out, I passed the frame policy notice Tanya had posted. Outside HR Brookfield Dynamics. Enforces policy 7.4 leadership must ensure compliance is visible and accountable at every level. Months earlier, I weaponized that exact clause. It was supposed to be a dull compliance line, buried in handbooks no one read. I'd pulled it into the light and let it speak louder than any speech I could give. That clause became my quiet ally, my proof. That was the revenge, if you want to call it that. Not shouting, not a takedown. Just letting the policies, the very things they ignored, do the heavy lifting. At home that night, Evan had his science project spread across the dining table again. Wooden sticks, glue, and one crooked frame that he was determined to straighten. It's supposed to hold weight, he told me, pressing the crossbeams, even if nobody notices how it's built. I smiled, hearing more truth in that than most of the strategy meetings I'd sat through. He didn't know it, but he'd given me the metaphor I'd been living by. I thought about all the times I'd walked out of this house before dawn badge pinging at 6:12 a.m., telling myself it was for stability. Truth was, it was survival, making myself useful enough not to be disposable. They told me I wasn't leadership material. What they meant was I was invisible, and I let them believe it until silence stopped being safe. Rick's exit didn't come with applause. There was no public scandal, no viral headline. Elaine wanted stability, not spectacle. That was fine by me. I wasn't chasing applause. Authority isn't applause, it's a ledger with your name at the top, every entry, a reminder that visibility cuts both ways. Kara avoided my office now, but when our eyes did meet in passing, there was a trace of something different. Not fear, not respect exactly, just recognition. She knew I'd stopped playing her game and built my own. And she knew it worked. The real cost came later in quiet moments. When the title hit my inbox, Director of Systems, effective immediately, I felt the weight settle. Not relief, not victory, just weight. Visibility means you can't hide in the gears anymore. Every decision, every policy, every mistake has your name on it. Still, it was better than silence. A week after Rick's exit, Elaine called me into her office. No preamble, just, "The board wants a rebuild plan in 60 days. You're leading it." I nodded, already knowing where to start. The same systems I'd kept in shadow for years would now be the blueprint for everyone else. Later that evening, Evan asked me if my office was different now. I told him the truth. Same walls, same badge, just a different kind of noise. He laughed, then showed me his finished frame, crooked but standing. "It works," he said proudly. That's when it clicked. My revenge wasn't about Rick or Kara or even Elaine. It was about proving that invisible work matters, that the frame holds even when nobody claps for it. And once it's visible, you can't unsee it. I didn't want them bankrupt. I didn't want a crown. I wanted accountability. Proof that the systems I built out of silence weren't just duct tape, they were the backbone. And this time, nobody could pretend otherwise. The last time I left the office that week, the badge ping echoed sharp in the empty lobby. Months ago, that sound meant survival. Now it was a reminder the frame held my name was on the ledger, and silence no longer defined me. If you've ever been told you weren't leadership material, I'd ask you, what did you do next? Did you stay silent, or did you let your work speak in ways they couldn't ignore? Share your story, because the quiet ones, we're not invisible anymore.